Welcome to the next episode of the Existential Files. Hello, Louie.
Hello, Matthew.
Would you say a little bit about our guest today? Peter?
Today we are joined by Peter Hankins, who is the author of a very lovely blog called Conscious Entities. And I guess, Peter, do you want to give us a little bit of a bio about yourself? Is that cheap of me to do that, to put it onto you?
No, go on. The origin of the blog is I did philosophy as a degree and then forgot about it for a few years. And then I was listening to, I think it was probably John Searle on the radio. And I kind of thought to myself, this business of consciousness, I could straighten it out given a couple of hours. So why don't I read a couple of books and then just, I'll do the answer to that. And that's how I started the blog, which wasn't a blog in those days. It was painfully hand-coded HTML, and started reading a couple of books that turned into, a couple of meters of books. And here we are today, about, 12 years later. So there we are.
So, isn't that what Crick decided to do? Didn't Crick hope to solve consciousness after having cracked the genome? He was like, well, I can solve this in an afternoon, and he didn't get anywhere either. Is that right?
Yeah, it seems to be a bit of a thing that after you've got your first Nobel Prize, you look around for somewhere fairly easy where you could pick off another one, and consciousness often seems to be the one that people pick.
So,
Let me ask a naive question then, which I kind of suspect I know one version of the answer to that helps follow on from that then. So you say consciousness seems to be a good one to pick. I can simply ask the question why, which may lead us into then, well, why are we also interested in consciousness?
Why are we interested in it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's where we live, isn't it? Really, we were talking earlier about the self, and the notion of the self and consciousness is all tied up together. So it kind of connects with us in a very existential, important kind of place, I would say. But at the same time, it is mysterious in a way that other subjects aren't. Particularly what they call the hard problem, the question of why is experience actually like anything. It's one of those things that is a fairly simple sort of problem to pose. So people often, you don't have to be a philosophy professor for the question to pose itself to you, but it's very difficult to get a grasp on. So I think it's tantalizing and also seems sort of important at the same time.
Now, if we agree that it is a mystery, you've written a book, haven't you, as well as your blog, Peter? Do you want to plug it? I mean, I don't know.
Available through Amazon or
and Shadows of Consciousness, is that right?
Shadows of Consciousness, yes. I did it because I thought I had to in the end. People would occasionally say to me, well, you write this blog and you explore other people's views, but what do you think yourself? And I said, well, if you read blog, you know what I think. But
and so do you think you've cracked it then? That's the question that comes to my mind.
No, not completely. I think I've got one or two handy answers. I mean, when it comes to the easy problem, I think I've got one or two partial answers. When it comes to the hard problem, I think people have misconstrued it, and that it isn't a problem as originally stated, but that it's another problem. That it's the problem of why is anything real, really?
Do you mind us just explaining those? Because lots of different people are going to listen to our podcast. Hopefully. I mean, it might just be one person, but and I think I can hear Matthew in the background going, "Easy problem, hard problem."
Yes.
Yeah, all right, Louie. All right, don't point it out. I was going to ask for the sake of listeners.
Matt, put your microphone near your mouth, please.
Oh, I'll put it right next to my mouth.
Very good. There you go.
Yeah, you could assume that, for example, I would hope that at least my dad would listen to this, and my wife might listen to it. So you can assume that anybody who has a broad interest in this, and we've already said that we live here, we live in this idea of consciousness. So we all have some interest in understanding, well, what is this experience we seem to, in quotes, experience?
Yeah.
So yes, this idea that you've touched upon the so-called hard problem, and then you made reference to the easy problem. So say a little bit more about those.
Yes. it's often accepted these days that there are two problems of consciousness, and that this terminology of the easy problem and the hard problem goes back to David Chalmers. And the easy problem is really, it's not one problem, it's a whole set of problems about how your mind works, how you behave rationally, and things like that, which is fairly daunting, but it seems like you might manage to get some kind of a grip on it, and science might provide some of the answers. It doesn't look as if neurology is irrelevant or anything terrible like that. The hard problem is about why there is anything it's like to have an experience. Nagel talked about what is it like to be a bat. We can't know what it's like to be a bat. There's something it's like to be a bat, but we're not bats, so we'll never know. Or there's the famous story of Mary, the colour scientist, who's an unfortunate woman who's brought up without ever seeing colour. But she's a scientist and she studies colour. So from an academic point of view, she knows everything you could ever possibly know about it. She doesn't just know the science we've got now. She knows all the science we'll ever discover. Then one day she sees like a red rose. And the question is, does she now know something she didn't know before? And the expectation is you will answer, yes, she knows what red is like. And if that's something new she's learned, then it's something over and above the science, because we've specified that she knew all the science to begin with, and now she knows something else, what it's actually like. Now, you may or may not be convinced by that, but that's the argument. And that is the hard problem about how to explain that, what it is like, the actual, you call it phenomenal experience of actual reality. You can imagine that you would... you could be like a robot and you could carry out all your normal behaviour, and yet there could be, as it were, no light on in your head. There could just be action and reaction. And that's one of David Chalmers' examples. He says, is it conceivable that I could have a zombie twin? A zombie being a person who behaves exactly like me, is exactly like me in every way, but just doesn't have that experience when they're doing their behavior, when they're seeing red or tasting tastes or smelling smells. There's just some computational process going on, and there's nothing it is like for them. So there we are.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Now, one bit I was picking up from there. So first of all, yes, I was thinking of that word, phenomenology. Which some of these ideas that we would explore within psychology of what's it like to have this particular experience. So the experience of being alive, being a conscious being of some sort. And I was picking up from Mary, the colour scientist, which Louie had briefly mentioned to me beforehand. So hearing it from you again helped me get a little more understanding to it. The one thing I pick up from there is it telling us something then about potentially the fundamental limits of science?
Yes.
Which again, for the listeners who have followed us in this journey so far, the very first podcast, we were talking about the extent to which science can help us or explore these so-called existential, or here maybe, phenomenological questions.
Yes, it certainly sets itself out to say here is a realm that is, definitely beyond the reach of science. But people would argue with that. Dennett, for example, tackling Mary, he says the problem is the story asks you to assume something that you can't assume. He says it asks you to assume right off the bat that she knows everything you could possibly ever know about colour. And now you think you can imagine what that will be like, but you can't imagine what that would be like. And so all your intuitions about whether she would learn something new or not are flawed. If you really knew everything about colour, then you'd be able to work out exactly what the experience of red would be like. And when she went into the room and saw the red rose for the first time, she'd just say, yep, that confirms all my prior deductions about colour. Thanks very much. Not particularly interesting. What's next?
So absolutely. So in which case, who came up with the Mary the colour scientist scenario?
I think that was Frank Jackson, if I remember rightly.
So we can just we could deal with that scenario, saying, it's a faulty scenario. We don't need to try and explain.
Well, that would be Dennett's view. That would be Dennett's view. Yeah, okay. I wouldn't look at it that way. I think the mistake is to assume that she knows something new once she's seen the red rose. I don't think it's a matter of knowing something new. The difference is just that she's had the actual experience. The thing is, we're really impressed by theories and theoretical discourse, and so we expect a theory to contain everything. But the one thing it can't contain is the actual reality of the experience, obviously, really, when you think about it in those terms. So Mary has theoretical knowledge of colour, but it would be mad to think that knowing the theory of colour conveys the actual reality of colour itself. So reality is a separate thing, and that's why I say that the hard problem is not really about consciousness as such, it's about reality, and it's the reality of experience that adds the extra little magic ingredient that we find hard to explain because it's reality, which is sort of inexplicable or very difficult to explain anyway.
Should we leave that episode there then? That seems like a good place to...
Well, let's sell a bit more than that. If we're going to do that, we're going to say, well, that's absolutely fascinating.
Well, it is absolutely fascinating.
Well, you've got to make it sound to really go, okay, that sounds a bit clever and complex. Well, it is. But all Peter's done a really good job of there is showing to us that this idea of consciousness, just the term we often talk about, well, we walk about being awake as we go back to our day, so we're experiencing some level of consciousness. We fall asleep every night, only to wake again the next day. So we maybe explore in other episodes, well, we talk about levels of consciousness, different states of consciousness. But what Peter's really trying to get to the bottom of there is, by consciousness, particularly that so-called hard problem, is, well, we're exploring the phenomenology of the experience of being, which in some ways, that's the existential question, isn't it? What's it like to be someone, and the extent to which science can do that? And possibly even questioning the potential limits of science, or the challenge between phenomenological type questions and questions which are trying to explain everything else, maybe apart from the actual experience of it itself. So thank you, Peter. Really appreciate that. Maybe you'll join us again for another one.
Oh, delighted.
Thank you. So bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.